Before the war, the Warsaw Zoo was a place of wonder, a living Eden in the heart of Poland's bustling capital. Children pressed their faces to cages, couples strolled under willows, and laughter mixed with the calls of lions and elephants. At the center of it all were Jan and Antonina Żabiński, a devoted couple whose love for animals, and for each other, gave the zoo its soul. Jan was the director, a biologist and quiet intellectual. Antonina, gentle but fiercely brave, had an uncanny bond with the creatures she cared for. Their home, on the zoo's grounds, was filled with music, books, and the rustling of fur and feathers. Evenings often ended with Antonina at the piano and their son Richard asleep under the table while a lynx or badger dozed beside him. They had built more than a zoo, they had built a sanctuary. By the late 1930s, the Warsaw Zoo was among the finest in Europe, admired for its scientific work and humane treatment of animals. Foreign visitors came to see rare species from around the world, and even the Polish president stopped by to congratulate Jan on his work. The zoo symbolized everything the Żabińskis loved about their country: culture, care, and quiet strength. But in September 1939, all that beauty was shattered. When the German army invaded Poland, Warsaw was one of the first cities to fall. The bombs came without warning. Explosions rocked the zoo, shattering cages and scattering animals into the burning streets. Antonina later wrote, "I heard the lions roaring in terror, the monkeys shrieking as if they understood that the end had come." Jan raced from cage to cage under the falling bombs, trying desperately to free what animals he could. Some he saved, most he could not. When the bombardment ended, the zoo was a graveyard. Days later, German troops marched through the wreckage. The occupiers quickly took control of the zoo, seizing its rare animals for Berlin's own zoological gardens and shooting the rest for sport or food. Antonina watched in horror as soldiers posed for photographs beside the carcasses of her elephants. The zoo that had once been filled with life now reeked of death and gasoline. Jan was allowed to remain as caretaker, maintaining what was left under the eye of Nazi officials. To the Germans, he was just another Polish functionary, harmless, obedient, insignificant. But behind his calm demeanor, Jan's mind was already turning toward resistance. He had seen his city fall, his animals slaughtered, his people enslaved. If he could no longer protect his zoo, he would protect something else. The Żabińskis' home, built into the grounds, remained miraculously intact. Its basement survived the bombings, and under the ruins of the animal cages were cellars and tunnels still hidden from the Germans' gaze. As Antonina tended to the surviving creatures, rabbits, a few foxes, the beloved piglet they called Pudgy, Jan began to whisper to trusted friends. The Jewish families who once visited the zoo, who had shared dinners and laughter before the war, were now being herded into the Warsaw ghetto. Many were doomed. Unless someone helped them. The idea began as a flicker, a question: could the zoo, empty, broken, forgotten, become a sanctuary again? Could its ruins shelter not beasts, but people? In that moment, the Żabińskis made a vow. If they could not save their animals, they would save humans, as many as they could, for as long as they could. The Warsaw Zoo, once a place of wonder, would soon become one of the most remarkable refuges of courage and compassion in all of World War II. Beneath its cages and enclosures, under the noses of the occupiers, a secret resistance was about to take root. The siege of Warsaw had left the city in ruins. Smoke still drifted over the rooftops as German troops paraded through the rubble, their boots crushing what remained of Poland's freedom. Among the ruins stood the remnants of the zoo, shattered cages, burned-out trucks, and the empty shells of enclosures that once held the wild heart of the city. Jan and Antonina Żabiński walked through it in silence, the cries of wounded animals still echoing faintly through the broken grounds. Their paradise was gone, but they were alive. And that meant there was still work to do. The Germans moved quickly to reorganize the city. Within weeks, the occupation authorities took control of the zoo. The Reich's chief zoologist, Lutz Heck, an old acquaintance of Jan's, arrived from Berlin. He walked through the devastation with a strange detachment, measuring cages and inspecting corpses. To him, the war was an opportunity, a chance to expand his own collection for Hitler's grand vision of a pure Aryan wildlife reserve. He confiscated the zoo's rarest surviving animals for the Berlin Zoological Garden and ordered others shot. Jan stood by helplessly as his elephants, lions, and even the beloved lynx were taken away or killed. But while Heck saw only animals, Jan saw a mask. The Germans wanted to keep him as a caretaker, to feed the remaining livestock and maintain the grounds as a supply station for fur and meat. It was a dangerous role, but it gave him something precious: access. He could move in and out of the zoo without suspicion, and he could visit the city, even the edges of the newly built Warsaw Ghetto, where thousands of Jews were being forced behind barbed wire. Inside that walled prison, disease and starvation spread like wildfire. Jan knew many of the people trapped there: professors, artists, musicians, colleagues from the scientific community. He saw their despair and their slow erasure from the city's life. And he could not look away. In secret meetings with members of the Polish underground, Jan began to discuss how to help. His position at the zoo was ideal. The Germans viewed it as harmless, and its many cages, tunnels, and cellars were never fully inspected. The grounds were sprawling, filled with places to hide. Antonina, always intuitive, sensed what her husband intended before he spoke it aloud. "The zoo is still a refuge," she told him one night as they sat by lamplight, their son Richard asleep nearby. "If we can no longer save the animals, we can save people." She said it softly, but with conviction. Jan nodded. "Then that is what we will do." The plan took shape quietly, under the noses of German officers who occasionally visited for wine or dinner. The Żabińskis began to clear the cellars beneath the house, turning them into makeshift hiding places. Old animal cages were converted into rooms, feed bins became beds. The smell of hay and earth masked the scent of human presence. Jan used his work permits to enter the ghetto under the pretext of inspecting animal feed supplies. Hidden in his cart, he smuggled out people instead, a few at first, then more. Each trip was a gamble. If he were caught, he and his family would be executed. But the risk didn't stop him. He would deliver those he rescued to the zoo, where Antonina would meet them with tea, calm words, and a place to rest. At night, she played the piano as a signal. One tune meant safety, another meant danger. When German soldiers approached, the music would change, and the people hiding below would fall silent. Above their heads, the zookeeper's wife continued to play, her hands steady even when her heart raced. The zoo that once roared with life was silent now, except for the whispers of those who hid beneath its ground, fugitives who had escaped the ghetto's walls and now lived between hope and death. The Germans thought the zoo was empty. They were wrong. Beneath their boots, a new kind of life was stirring, one built on courage, secrecy, and the quiet defiance of ordinary people who refused to surrender their humanity. By 1941, Warsaw had become a city of ghosts. The Nazi occupation had strangled it in fear and silence. The Warsaw Ghetto, sealed off by barbed wire and brick, held more than 400,000 Jews crammed into an area barely large enough for a fraction of them to survive. Hunger, disease, and executions were daily realities. Outside the walls, Poles watched helplessly as their neighbors vanished into the ghetto's shadows. Among those watching were Jan and Antonina Żabiński, whose zoo, now half destroyed, lay eerily quiet under German control. The Żabińskis' home still stood on the zoo grounds, and that house would soon become one of the most extraordinary sanctuaries in occupied Europe. Jan, who worked officially as the city's superintendent of public parks, had permission to move freely around Warsaw, including occasional access to the ghetto under the pretext of inspecting park maintenance or collecting scraps to feed pigs at the zoo. This freedom became his weapon. It began with one person, a friend, a scientist from the Warsaw University who was Jewish and trapped inside the ghetto. Jan smuggled him out in his truck, hidden beneath a pile of garbage and animal carcasses destined for disposal. The man survived, and word spread. Others began to beg for help. Each time, Jan returned to the ghetto, calm and professional, clipboard in hand. To the guards, he was just another bureaucrat. To those hiding behind crumbling walls, he was a lifeline. Antonina kept the house ready. The old cages and underground tunnels that once sheltered foxes and badgers now became hiding places for men, women, and children. The smell of hay and the noise of the remaining animals masked the scent and sound of human life. They called their operation, "The House Under a Crazy Star," a phrase from one of Antonina's favorite novels, symbolizing both madness and hope. The risk was unimaginable. German officers often visited the zoo grounds for meetings or picnics. They liked Antonina's grace and the sight of her playing piano while a half-tame lynx wandered through the room. They had no idea that beneath their feet, beneath the polished floors and cheerful music, fugitives were hiding, silent, breath held, praying the notes would never stop. Antonina developed a system of signals. When she played a cheerful waltz, it meant the house was safe, the guests below could breathe, stretch, speak softly. But if she played Chopin's Tristesse, it meant danger, German officers were near, and every sound had to vanish. Dozens of Jews passed through the zoo in this way, scholars, doctors, musicians, entire families. Some stayed for a night before Jan found them false papers and a path to the countryside. Others stayed for months, living like shadows beneath the animal cages. The Żabińskis shared their food, their clothing, even their child's toys. Little Richard, too young to understand fully, was taught never to ask questions about the guests. Every day was a balancing act between life and exposure. Jan carried out his duties for the Germans with the mask of a quiet, obedient employee, while by night he guided the hunted through the ruins of Warsaw. Antonina tended to the survivors, nursing them back to strength, comforting them with stories, piano music, and the gentle presence of the few animals left alive. Each rescue brought greater danger. The Gestapo's network was tightening, informants were everywhere. Yet the Żabińskis pressed on. The zoo's ruins, once the symbol of Poland's shattered peace, had become its beating heart of defiance. What began as one rescue had turned into a full-scale operation, a secret arc in the center of a city drowning in blood. And as the war dragged on, the Żabińskis would need every ounce of cunning, courage, and love to keep their refuge alive. The code name, "The House Under a Crazy Star," was more than poetic, it was a shield. By 1942, the Żabińskis' zoo house had become a living illusion, a place where normalcy was staged for German eyes while courage and fear lived just beneath the surface. Every day was a performance, every smile rehearsed, every note Antonina played a message. Above ground, the family hosted Nazi officials for tea and scientific discussions. Below ground, people hid in silence, listening to the footsteps of their hunters. The deception began with sound. Antonina's piano became both comfort and code. A bright, cheerful melody meant the danger had passed, that the air was safe. But if she played Chopin's Tristesse, a melancholy tune that hung in the air like a prayer, it meant danger. At that sound, every guest froze. Conversation stopped mid-word. Children held their breath. Behind false walls, under the stairs, and in animal pens converted to bunkers, they waited. Some of the Germans who visited the zoo were regulars. Lutz Heck, the Berlin zoologist who had looted the animals months earlier, returned often. He fancied himself a friend of the Żabińskis, even flirted with Antonina, bringing her small gifts, unaware that his boots were clicking only a few meters above the people he would have sent to their deaths. His presence was a mask of civility that could turn fatal in an instant. Antonina smiled, accepted his gifts, poured his tea, and prayed that none of the hidden doors would creak. Jan's operation expanded in secret. Using his credentials as superintendent of Warsaw's parks, he moved between the zoo, the city, and the ghetto, carrying supplies and messages for the Polish underground. He smuggled people out of the ghetto under loads of pig slop or inside sacks of leaves and branches. Each trip was a gamble, the Gestapo were everywhere, checkpoints constant. Yet Jan's composure, polite, efficient, forgettable, made him invisible. The zoo itself became a waypoint in a vast network of resistance. Those who passed through the Żabińskis' care often stayed only a few days before being moved to safer locations in the countryside. Others, too sick or too young, remained for months. Each person carried a story: a violinist who played softly for Antonina's son at night, a rabbi who whispered prayers under the lion cages, a child who learned to mimic animal noises to pass the time. Antonina wrote later, "The house was full of fear, but it was also full of laughter." She made sure that those in hiding were not just alive, but human, that they could feel, sing, and hope, even in darkness. Outside, Warsaw grew colder. The Nazi grip tightened, and rumors of mass deportations filled the air. People began vanishing from the ghetto in trains that never returned. Jan knew what it meant, and he began to act faster, taking greater risks. He forged papers, bribed guards, lied to officials, and moved more people through the zoo's secret passages. But the danger was escalating. Neighbors whispered. German patrols became more suspicious. And one afternoon, a local informant reported seeing unusual movement at the zoo. The Germans came to inspect. Antonina's heart pounded as she opened the door. "We are checking for contraband," the officer said flatly. She smiled and gestured toward the ruins. "Please, go ahead. Only ghosts live here now." He stepped inside. And below his boots, in a dark crawl space under the floorboards, 12 people waited, silent, terrified, holding hands as Antonina played the piano upstairs, her fingers trembling on the keys. When the officers finally left, she closed the door and wept quietly at the keyboard. The house under a crazy star had survived another day, and so had the lives it hid. By 1943, the Warsaw Zoo's secret was growing heavier. More people were coming, some guided by word of mouth, others by desperate chance, and the Żabińskis' modest house was filling with ghosts who could not exist. Each one came with a false name, a new story, and a look in their eyes that told Antonina everything she needed to know. They had seen what no one should ever see. The guests of the zoo came from every corner of Warsaw's vanished world. There was Magda Gross, a sculptor who once designed statues for the zoo before the war. There was a mathematics professor, a violinist, a nurse, a child who hadn't spoken since the ghetto burned. The Żabińskis called them "our animals," a code born from grim humor. "We still run a zoo," Antonina said softly one night. "Only the species have changed." Life in hiding was a fragile routine. By day, Jan continued his official duties with the Germans, collecting food scraps for animal feed and maintaining the parks. He was often gone for hours, moving between the ghetto and the zoo, smuggling both information and people. At home, Antonina created the illusion of calm. She kept the household running, tending to the remaining animals so that the zoo appeared functional. A few ducks, rabbits, and pigs provided the soundtrack of normalcy that concealed the breathing beneath the floors. She refused to let fear consume the house. "We must have music," she said. Evenings were filled with soft piano tunes and whispered stories. She read aloud to the hidden families, fairy tales and poetry, her voice carrying through the walls like a lullaby. For a few hours, they could almost forget the world outside. But every knock at the door froze their hearts. Gestapo patrols roamed the district, and random searches had become routine. Antonina developed a ritual for these moments. She would quickly hide any dishes or bedding that hinted at extra guests, then sit calmly by the piano, her fingers poised on the keys. When soldiers entered, she played, a smile fixed on her face, her pulse thundering beneath it. The officers would glance around, see only a quiet woman and her son, and leave. The danger was constant, but so was compassion. Antonina nursed the sick, found clothing for the children, and shared every scrap of food the family had. When shortages worsened, Jan resorted to barter and theft, trading with farmers, even stealing from German supply depots. "It is not theft," he said grimly, "if it buys life." Still, the burden grew. Some nights, Antonina woke from nightmares, trains screaming, gunshots echoing through the city. Yet in the morning, she forced herself to smile for those hiding below. "Hope," she would tell them, "is our only weapon." Each person who passed through the zoo carried a fragment of the ghetto's story, the starvation, the deportations, the whispers of Treblinka. Many had lost everyone. In their eyes, Antonina saw both despair and disbelief that anyone would risk so much for them. She answered only with kindness. By the end of 1943, more than 100 people had passed through the Żabińskis' hidden refuge. Some stayed for days, others for months. Most found a way to safety, forged papers, safe houses, partisan routes. Some vanished again, this time forever. The zoo's ruins were now a crossroads of life and death, a fragile artery of defiance pulsing beneath Nazi boots. And though no one could see it from the street, the Warsaw Zoo, once a place of wonder, had become something greater, a testament to the quiet power of human courage. By 1944, the war had entered its bloodiest chapter, and the Żabińskis' quiet rebellion grew even more dangerous. The Nazi machine was tightening its grip on Warsaw. Deportations from the ghetto had nearly emptied it, the Germans called it a Jew-free zone. But in truth, hundreds still hid, in cellars, in ruins, and beneath the ground. The Warsaw Zoo had become one of the last refuges still breathing. Jan's double life had become a labyrinth of risk. By day, he played the obedient Polish official, managing parks, tending what remained of the zoo, reporting to German supervisors with calm efficiency. By night, he worked for the Polish Home Army, Armia Krajowa, the underground resistance preparing for a national uprising. He smuggled weapons inside sacks of animal feed, transported documents under the false bottom of his truck, and used the zoo's tunnels to move fugitives out of the city. Antonina knew that every time he left the house, she might never see him again. She said little, only helped him pack, then watched from the window until he disappeared beyond the broken gates. When he returned, covered in dust and exhaustion, she said nothing of her own fears. Their marriage had become a silent pact, one built on shared danger, where love was expressed not through words, but through endurance. German officers still visited occasionally, and their presence turned the house into a stage. The Żabińskis smiled, poured drinks, and nodded politely as soldiers praised the good Poles who kept the grounds orderly. None of the men in polished boots guessed that beneath their feet lay maps, weapons, and people they hunted daily. The zoo had become a perfect disguise, a camouflage of civility in a city of terror. The underground network expanded. Jan coordinated with resistance couriers and Catholic convents, which provided false baptismal certificates for Jews escaping the ghetto. He ferried families through the ruins, guided by moonlight and instinct. Many of those he saved would never know his name. To them, he was just a quiet man with a soft voice and steady hands who appeared in the darkness and whispered, "Come quickly, it's time." Antonina carried her own burden. The house was filled again, every room claimed by fear and fragile life. She managed to make it seem normal for their young son, Richard, though he was old enough now to sense the truth. He helped in small ways, fetching water, keeping secrets. When he asked why they risked so much, Antonina told him gently, "Because if we don't, we are no better than those who kill." Outside the zoo walls, the city simmered with rebellion. The Polish underground was preparing for the Warsaw uprising, an act of desperate defiance that would soon consume the city. Jan stockpiled weapons in hidden compartments among animal cages, waiting for the signal. But the danger grew closer. Gestapo informants began to suspect the zookeeper's movements. One evening, Jan returned home to find German soldiers searching the house. He walked calmly to the door, his heart pounding. Antonina, sitting at the piano, met his eyes and began to play a waltz, the signal for silence. The soldiers found nothing. They left, muttering. Only then did Jan exhale, his shirt soaked in sweat. The war had made them masters of deception, but it could not erase their humanity. Even in the darkest hours, Antonina still fed the stray animals that wandered the ruins. "They have no sides in this war," she said. The zoo had become a reflection of Poland itself, wounded, divided, but unbroken. And soon, the city around them would rise in fire. When it did, the Żabińskis' quiet rebellion would face its greatest test yet. August 1, 1944. At 5 p.m., shots cracked through Warsaw and white and red armbands appeared like flowers in the dust. The Warsaw uprising had begun. Jan Żabiński slipped the door latch with a last look at Antonina. The weapons he had hidden among feed bins were already in the hands of Home Army fighters. "I'll be back before dawn," he promised, knowing dawn might be weeks away. Antonina answered with the only armor she had left, "Then I'll keep the house playing." She sat at the piano as he vanished through the broken gates. War turned the zoo grounds into a frontier. The city west of the Vistula erupted, the eastern bank, where the zoo lay, bristled with patrols and checkpoints. German columns clattered past the villa, Soviet artillery rumbled from beyond the river. Bullet snaps stitched the air. Antonina kept her rituals alive, music for calm, Chopin's Tristesse for danger, because the cellars were still full. Even as barricades rose in the streets, fugitives whispered beneath the floors, waiting for whatever came first, rescue or ruin. Jan moved through the ruins with his unit, guiding couriers, hauling crates, slipping across courtyards he knew from years tending public parks. He carried no illusions. He'd seen too many arrests to mistake bravery for safety. On a late August run, shrapnel tore past, and gunfire pinned his group in a courtyard. Jan went down, blood soaking his sleeve. Captured among dozens of prisoners, he was marched away at rifle point. Within days, he disappeared into the machinery of the Reich, first a holding jail, then a POW camp in Germany. News reached the villa in fragments: he was alive, wounded, and gone. Antonina did not have the luxury of collapse. The house was fuller than ever. She rationed food, rewired false walls, and taught the children underground to breathe slowly when boots thudded overhead. When soldiers appeared at the door, she met them with tea and small talk, the piano's soft waltz covering the heartbeat of the house. More than once, an officer paused, listening, as if the floor itself sighed, then shrugged and left, fooled by the zoo's veneer of harmlessness. Outside, the city on the western bank was dying, block by block. Refugees reached the east bank with stories of executions in courtyards, houses set alight, whole districts leveled. Antonina's answer was to widen the hiding places. She cleared an old fox den and padded it with blankets. The feed room became a clinic, the rabbit hutches, a nursery. When a child coughed, she hummed to mask the sound. "This is a zoo," she told one terrified mother with a tired smile. "Noise is expected." In September, the Soviet army seized Praga, the eastern districts. The front line froze along the Vistula. For Antonina, the shift was a gasp of air, German patrols thinned, the worst searches ceased. Yet peril remained: stragglers, raids, informers. She used the lull to move people onward with forged papers that Jan's contacts had arranged before his capture. Some went to convents, some to farms, a few slipped across the river at night in small boats, praying the current and the shells would spare them. Amid all this, life insisted on itself. Antonina gave birth to a daughter Teresa, in late 1944, cradling the newborn while tapping a warning rhythm on the piano with one hand. The fugitives wept to see a baby in that place of fear. "It means there will be a tomorrow," someone whispered. Winter fell. The uprising on the western bank was crushed, Warsaw there was razed. From the villa's windows, Antonina saw a skyline of chimneys and smoke and knew Jan could not be among the returning crowds. Still she kept the house ready each night, lamps dimmed, blankets folded, a pot of thin soup warming in case someone knocked. The signals remained the same: waltz for safety, tristesse for silence, and the hidden breathed in time with the piano. By January 1945, the German line broke at last. Retreat pounded the roads, the Red Army rolled into the ruined capital. Antonina stepped into the brittle light with her son and newborn daughter and opened the cellar doors. Dusty figures blinked up at her, alive. She counted them the way she once counted animals after a storm: 1, 2, 5, 10, and only then allowed herself to shake. Somewhere in Germany, behind barbed wire, Jan waited for a war to end. In Warsaw, the zoo still stood, bomb-bitten, emptied, but victorious in its own fierce way. The house under a crazy star had held. And now, with the city in ashes, its last task remained: to gather the living, remember the lost, and wait for the keeper who had set it all in motion to find his way home. When spring finally came in 1945, the war was ending, but the city of Warsaw was almost gone. Streets had turned to dust, landmarks to ashes. The zoo that had once echoed with life now lay in ruins: broken fences, empty cages, and the faint smell of earth thawing after years of death. Yet in the midst of that silence, Antonina Żabińska stood with her children, watching the horizon. The Red Army's banners waved beyond the river. The nightmare was over. Days later, a telegram arrived from Germany. Jan was alive. After months in a prisoner of war camp, he had survived and was being released. When he finally returned, thin and limping, he found Antonina waiting at the zoo gate, the same gate where, years earlier, they had greeted elephants and schoolchildren. Now only crows watched. They embraced quietly. There were no words for what they had endured. The zoo was a graveyard. The cages were shattered, the enclosures overgrown. But Jan was already thinking of rebuilding. "It will live again," he said simply. "We will fill it with life." Together they began clearing debris, collecting whatever animals survived or could be brought back. For months, the sounds of construction replaced those of war: hammering, laughter, birdsong returning cautiously to the trees. Those they had saved began to return as well: men, women, and children who had once hidden beneath the floors or behind the cages. Some came to help, others came simply to thank them. Many brought small gifts: flowers, food, a single photograph saved from the ruins. One survivor pressed Jan's hand and said softly, "You kept us alive when the world forgot us." In time, word of the Żabińskis' courage spread beyond Poland. The truth of what they had done, the hundreds of Jews they had sheltered, the risks they had taken, slowly emerged. The Polish underground had lost most of its archives, and for years the details of their operation remained almost myth. But the survivors told their stories. They spoke of the piano melodies that signaled safety, of Antonina's calm voice during raids, of the zookeeper who risked his life again and again to lead them to freedom. In 1965, the Israeli Memorial Authority Yad Vashem honored Jan and Antonina Żabiński as righteous among the nations, a title given to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. When the couple visited Jerusalem, survivors they had hidden decades earlier came to greet them, their children beside them, living proof of the lives the Żabińskis had preserved. After the war, Jan continued his work in education and conservation, eventually becoming the director of Warsaw's reconstructed zoo. Antonina returned to her writing, recording their story in her memoir People and Animals. She wrote not of heroism, but of duty, of the small, quiet decisions that built a resistance stronger than any weapon. "We simply refused," she said, "to see people as animals and animals as things." The zoo became, once again, a place of life. Children returned to feed deer and laugh at monkeys. Couples strolled by ponds that once hid tunnels, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. The house where the Żabińskis had risked everything still stands, its walls unchanged. Beneath the floors, the empty cellars remain, silent witnesses to courage born in the darkest time humanity ever faced. Jan and Antonina grew old together among the animals they loved. When Antonina died in 1971, Jan planted trees for her across the zoo grounds. "Every branch," he said, "is a memory. The world would remember them not as zookeepers, but as guardians of humanity, proof that even in a world of terror, compassion could roar louder than fear." The zoo had once been a sanctuary for beasts. Under the Żabińskis, it became a sanctuary for souls.